All right, the topic for the day today is roots of real numbers. And when you hear the word root, maybe you think of square root, and that is one type of root, and we are going to cover that today. So here I've got a square root symbol, looks like this. A number goes underneath it, all right? And here's what it means, all right? And I think it's easier, this is in algebraic notation, but let's do it in terms of actual numbers, all right? Since 9 equals 3 squared, the square root of 9 is 3. So in other words, when you see a square root, you're asking yourself, what multiplied by itself will give me this number? 3 multiplied by itself will give me 9, so the square root of 9 is 3. So what we're going to do is go through a few examples of finding some square roots. All right, so that's what we have in example 1. So first of all, the square root of 25 is like asking yourself what multiplied by itself gives us 25, and that's 5. 5 times 5 is 25. So the square root of 25 is 5. All right? In example B, I've got a negative in front of my square root here. All right? So my square root symbol is like a grouping symbol, which means the first thing I'm going to do is find the square root of 25, which I've already said is 5, and then I'm going to put a negative in front of it. All right, example C is a little bit different, and here's why. This time, the negative is inside the square root symbol with the 25. And so that's asking me what multiplied by itself gives me negative 25. Now, nothing is going to work here because positive 5 times positive 5 gives me positive 25. Negative 5 times negative 5 gives me positive 25. Okay? There's no number times itself that's going to give me a negative number, because in order to get a negative number, I've got to multiply a positive times a negative. And that's not going to be something times itself, because that's completely different. So here, this is no real number. And guess what? Since we did say that we're going to talk about imaginary numbers in this chapter, we will learn how to do this when we talk about imaginary numbers, because this does represent an imaginary number. All right? But that's a couple days away. So, no real number. Now, I've got the square root of 1 over 25. Well, I know that the square root of 25 is 5, so think about this. What times itself gives me 1 over 25? Let's go to the side here. 1/5 times 1/5, multiply across the top and across the bottom, gives you 1 over 25. So the square root of 1 over 25 is 1/5. You can even do this with the decimals moved over a little bit, okay? This is the square root of 0.25, all right? This equals 0.5. 0.5 times 0.5 is 0.25. So if you can find the square root of 25, you can find all of these other roots. All right? So square root, though, is just one type of root that we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about some other types of roots. But first of all, let's do this. We're going to use some square roots to solve equations. So let's go to the bottom of the page. And I've got an equation that says x squared equals 9. All right? I have a way that I can use roots to solve this particular equation. And that is, remember my golden rule of algebra, do unto one side what you do unto another. And remember that some of the things that we could do is add, subtract, multiply, and divide on both sides. Well, guess what? We can also take the square root of both sides. So I am going to do that. I'm going to take the square root of both sides. Now the square root of x squared is just x, because x times x gives me x squared. So this is how I've gotten x all by itself. And we talked about this at the top of the page. The square root of 9 is 3. But we gotta wait just a minute here, because there is another answer. When we're solving equations, we've got to consider that the answer could also be -3, because let's plug that into the equation. If x is -3, will it work? So put -3 in parentheses and square that. And yes, I do get +9. So -3 is also going to work. So what you have to remember when you're using this method is that when you square root both sides, it's going to give you 2 answers, one positive, one negative. And the way that we can write that is by putting a little plus-minus sign in front of 3. And what that means is +3 or -3.